ladies and gentlemen of Bucharest. Give it up for Espen Brunborg.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce. Sorry about the wait. I would like to start in the immortal words of Metallica and say hello, what is it, Budapest? It's the first joke of my presentation. I also spoke to some really nice people outside, and I said, I'm here in Romania, I really want to introduce myself and say hello in Romanian. And they said, what you say is, Miros a Varza. No, my name is Espen. I live and work in Edinburgh. A few years ago, I started a company called Primate. We do websites and web apps and all sorts of things online. I have two dogs, Odin and Freya. They're barely visible there. They're actually greyhounds. They're quite tall. And I have a Twitter handle, which is also barely visible. Today, I'm going to talk about comedy. There will be some jokes, but mainly I'm going to talk about comedy in relation to web design and what it means as a concept in how we think and how we express ourselves. Comedy is not just funny. Comedy is also tragic or emotional or surprising. It's kind of all this magical stuff out there that we can't really quantify. Before I get that far, I want to tell a little story. I brought a very special book. I'm sure many of you guys have read it. And I'm going to read a little story from the chapter called Genesis. So, I hope none of you guys are easily offended. There will be a tiny bit of swearing, but all of this is just fictional, so don't worry. I actually did this in a church hall last week, and it occurred to me that maybe I should ask the audience if you're okay with this, and also ask upstairs if anyone have any objections, just give me a sign now. Oh. That would have been a lot better with actual sound on it. Now, I'll start. In the beginning, there was only HTML, and the web was very ugly indeed. And God said, let there be style, and behold, there was CSS. And his followers praised all colors and all fonts, and they floated left and they floated right. Thank you. And God was very, very pleased with himself, and he decided to go out and celebrate with a few drinks. And so it came to be that on the second day, God created Flash. And he was very hungover when he did so. And he said, praise me, for I have given you graphics, vector graphics and animation. And his followers praised him as they waited for the page to load. And then they clicked skip intro, and God was very annoyed because they worked really hard on that intro. And his followers inserted adverts on every single page, and God started to think that maybe Flash was a bad idea. And maybe it's a bad idea to get drunk on a Monday night. So on the third day, God created WordPress, and he was really determined to correct his mistake. And he said, praise me, for I have given you a voice. Now go forth and blog about love and kindness and all that is good about the world. And he said, hallelujah. And his followers said, hallelujah, world. And they blogged vigorously about interior design and makeup and celebrities. And they obviously developed WordPress plugins for all their adverts. On the fourth day, God created the iPhone. And the world went completely bonkers for it. But a young disciple named Ethan of Boston, he despaired and he pleaded with the Lord. Dear Lord, the iPhone is really great, but now our clients are asking us for two websites, one for mobiles and one for desktops. What should we do? And the Lord heard his plea, and he appeared before Ethan in the shape of a burning modem. And he said, and then he gave Ethan the holy staff of media queries, and he said, spread the gospel of responsive design. And the world finally rejected Flash because the iPhone wouldn't display their adverts. On the 5th day, God unleashed upon his creation HTML video, retina screens, typography, all sorts of wonderful and marvelous things. And he said, "Praise me, for I have made it so that you may express yourselves more creatively and more passionately." And his followers rejoiced, and the internet tripled in size, and everything took forever to load, and autoplay video adverts became a thing. On the 6th day, God created preprocessors and frameworks and style guides and pattern libraries and design systems. And he said, "Praise me, for I have made it so that you may express yourselves more efficiently and more consistently." And if his followers rejoiced, and they quickly set about arguing about dependencies and naming conventions. But God was happy. And God went to bed smiling because he knew that his work was over. And he was really looking forward to Netflix and chill. So it was on the 7th day that God got up really early because he was super excited to see what his followers had made of his creation. And he visited all of the websites and all of the web apps, and he wondered, how can so many different things look so similar? And he wondered, why are there adverts everywhere? And he wondered why everything took so long to load. And he clicked a link that said, "Lion meets human adoptive father after 13 years. You'll never guess what happens next." And he was very disappointed when he found out, because he already knew. Because God is all-knowing. And the more God explored, the more frustrated he grew. And by the end of the day, he thought to himself, fuck this. I gave them this great voice, but they're not saying anything important. I gave them boundless creativity, but the internet is dull and monotonous. So he said, they are not worthy. And he decided to cleanse his creation of sin. And so he created ad blockers, and he went back to sleep. And thus ends Genesis, which brings us to where we are now. It's 2016, and it's never been easier to make a website. At the same time, the web is really dull and it's homogeneous and everything looks the same. We have all these publishing platforms, we can host our own sites really quickly, we have templates, we have themes, and we have this great big publishing machine. It looks like this. I'm sure you've all used it at some point. And this is what we use to make websites nowadays. Of course, the first part of the publishing machine concerns the CMS. There are 3 main buttons, which means that if you want to make a blog, you press WordPress. If you want to make a magazine maybe, or a news site, you use WordPress. If you want to make a brochure site or campaign site maybe for a company, you use WordPress. There's a handful of platforms out there. The second part concerns the template. So the CMS handles the content, but what about the layout? Well, of course, the publishing machine can handle this as well. And again, we have this huge range of choice. We can choose between Classic 1, which is for the company that really wants to stand out from the crowd. And we have Classic 2, which is for the company that really wants to stand out from the crowd, but in a fairly similar way. After we've chosen the template, we pick a theme. The theme is the icing on the cake. It's what gives us real personality, really make our site stand out. And there's a whole number of options. We have, retro, obviously. It's very in vogue right now. We have vintage, traditional, old-fashioned, if you're into that. And if you want to be really meta, you can go for shiny and go back to Web 2.0. The point is, your theme makes it really unique in a kind of way that makes everybody else recognize your site. So it's kind of similar, but you know what I'm saying, right? Nobody wants to stand out. At the end of all of this, we have this funnel, and we can just cram all our content in there. We have top 10 articles and celebrity news, whatever it is. I'm not going to dwell on content because who gives a shit? It's not really that important. I had to put this up when I did the talk in the US. Hopefully you guys understand sarcasm. Now, at the end of this process, we fiddle with some knobs and we push a button, and out comes your website. It's a beautifully crafted website. It took us a long time to make. We sat there for maybe minutes, and we got this beautiful thing. And obviously, the publishing machine makes this super easy, and it's really, really cheap. In many cases, it's free, which is great. But the problem is that this website is in a sea of other websites, and they all more or less look the same. There's a pattern to it. They kind of read the same, they work the same more or less, and in a sense that's a really good thing, because like Yaron Schoen says, jackets all look the same too, but it's really good to know where your pockets are. So in terms of digital product design, it's really useful that we have this shared language, that people don't have to relearn an interface every time they visit the website. And this is built up over time. But the issue is that we're not all making jackets. Some people are making socks or gloves, hats, scarves, underwear. And what that means is we have all these different functions. We have beer shops, and we have portfolio sites, and we have to-do apps. There are so many different functions, but we don't have that many different forms. Our cookie-cutter website creator nowadays has kind of one or two shapes, and we have all this stuff that we want to cram through it. And it's really difficult to create something that's unique. Do you guys know who Mark Bolton is? Yep. He wrote an article, I think in 2013, called Design Abstraction Escalation. And he talks about design patterns and the tendency that we have as designers and developers to stow away certain snippets of code or content or design, like our navigation patterns or our widgets or carousels or whole templates or icons, etc. It's really tempting to kind of put all that stuff into drawers, and then the next project comes along, we just open the right drawers, we put it all together, and then we have a website. He says that this kind of ruins the design process. In fact, he says it's no longer design, it's just manufacturing. And this way of being efficient and conforming to existing patterns, it has a price, which is that our sites are less human. They lack soul, it lacks this feeling that it's been created from scratch for you or for your client. So I think there's a problem with the mindset of the publishing machine. And that mindset is that we have all this technology, we have algorithms and systems and templates, etc., and we kind of get lulled into this feeling that we can put the problem in on one end, and then our solution just pops out the other. But the fact is, technology will not save us. Technology is not the thing that will make our websites better. There's a guy called Joshua Topolsky who co-founded The Verge, and he wrote about this in the sense that companies, especially big media companies, they're looking for the next thing, be it maybe video or some sort of automated process or some automated content thing. They're looking for technology to save us and to make people pay for their shitty websites. But actually he's saying the problem isn't in technology, is that we, or they, make shit. We make so much shit, and it's really cheap shit, and no one really cares about our cheap shit. And our audience is getting more and more aware of this. They expect more, they're connected, they talk to each other, they're calling us out on all this cheap shit, because what they want is the good shit. There's a lot of shits in here, I'm sorry. They will go somewhere to find this good shit, and they will even pay for the good shit. Which obviously brings me to my next chapter, which is called The Good Shit. Now, what is the good shit? I think we can all agree that we all know good shit when we see it. It looks like this. But what defines it? What defines good design? I think good design is fast. And by that I mean users shouldn't have to wait for the content to load. We should be optimized, it should be performant. There should be no distractions or visual clutter to stop us from experiencing a site. Basically, they should get what they want when they want it. Good design is universal, which means that no matter what kind of device I'm on, I should get the same experience as someone on a high-end device. No matter what sort of disabilities I suffer from, I should still be able to get the same experience. Anything other than a universal experience is, to some degree, discrimination. Good design is intuitive. which I said earlier, we shouldn't have to relearn an interface. We should speak in the same language. It should be predictable. It should require no stumbling blocks to get into it. It's invisible. I think we've all heard this thing that typography is successful when you don't notice the typography. If I can read a poem or a blog post or whatever and I don't notice the big letters or the funky serifs, that means the typography is good. Good design is user-centric, which means that me as a designer, I have no ego when it comes to design. I should not put my own emotions into it. I should listen to the needs and the wants of the user. And finally, good design is scientific. I should be able to test my design. I should be able to analyze that data and then iteratively improve on what I've done. Who here in this room disagrees with this list? 2 people. Good. Because there is an alternative mindset as well. Sometimes good design is slow. Sometimes there's value in taking the time to really get a point across. There's value in making people wait. On that note, I'm just going to have a drink. So let that simmer for a bit. Good design is also individual. So for me, the best experience I can have is an experience that feels like it's just made for me. Only me. It's like, wow, I can't believe you made this thing and it feels so right for me. Sometimes the common lowest denominator gets in the way of individual experiences because we want to cater for everybody. It means that it's kind of, we lose the specialness and everything becomes a little bit bland. So I think it's important to remember that your website, it's not for everyone. And all websites, every website is not for you either. Good design is surprising. It's interesting and funny to laugh at an unexpected joke. It's empowering to discover something that you needed to exert some mental effort to discover. Good design is impressive. It's not just invisible. I think we only have to look as far as calligraphy or lettering to see how text can be completely transformed with a visually rich experience where we can see the efforts that's gone into crafting it. Good design is also visionary. I don't think the iPhone would have looked the way it does if Steve Jobs went back in whatever early 2000s and said, what do you guys want from an MP3 player? He had a vision and he just followed through and he created an icon. I think also Henry Ford, if he asked his audience, what do you guys want? They would have said, a faster horse. You know, it takes a vision to create something that's truly unique. And if you expose that vision to a committee, well, often it just dies. And finally, good design is artistic. It's challenging and it's emotional. It's enlightening. It's not just about solving UI problems. And I think original experiences that are truly immersive or really make us feel something, you can't predict that just by doing A/B testing. Now, how many people in the room disagree with the second list? 1? 2? So it's equal. The rest of you don't care. We have this split in the community. We have these 2 camps of thinking, I think. And some of you probably agree with some of these and disagree with others. But I think it's interesting to see how there are 2 sets of truths, and they seem to oppose each other. We might call them, you know, utility versus beauty, or science versus art, or convention versus expression. The end result is that we're maybe not physically battling, but we're kind of telling each other, no, it should be super performant, no, it should be super creative. So what do we do? Well, Mark Bolton says, maybe we shouldn't just care so much about what the 2 camps are, maybe we just bring them together, because we can have convention and expression. We could have science and art. We could have utility and beauty. Or we can have music and comedy. The end. I'm just kidding. To explain music and comedy in the context of web design, I need to introduce one guy. His name is Jeff. I met him in Barcelona last year. He's from New York. He's an artist and a creative director. Who here loves Seinfeld? Yes, good. Me and Jeff also love Seinfeld, and we spoke about it at length, and it was a really, really good talk, but not just because we like Seinfeld. It was because Jeff had some interesting stuff to say about music and comedy. He said that music and comedy are both basically just based on the rhythm. So there are two kind of concepts that play our brain. So they play the same instrument, but they play slightly differently. But at the basis of how they function is rhythm. Musical rhythm is easy. We can hear it. We can dance to it, or nod our hands, or tap our fingers. Comedic rhythm is slightly different because it's invisible. But it's still there. So the basic comedic rhythm is setup, anticipation, and punchline. For example, the setup. How did the hipster burn his tongue? Anticipation. You're waiting. Well, it's because he drank his coffee before it was cool. So they both have a rhythm, and rhythm is basically the concept of expectation on one hand and reward on the other. So both music and comedy, they set up expectations, but the specific point where they differ is how you meet that expectation. So in music, the expectation is always met. That's what makes music nice and harmonious and pleasant to our ears. In a rhythm, you expect the next beat to come. If you're talking about harmony, we expect a certain harmony, and when we get it, it sounds nice. This is kind of inbuilt in us. So music that sounds nice is usually meeting our expectations, unless it's like experimental jazz, in which case, I'm not sure if you're listening to music at all. In comedy, it's the opposite. So in the comedy, we set up an expectation, and then we try and break that expectation. So this is Bob. He's walking to work, just like many of you guys will. And the expectation is for you guys now that he will just go to his office and open his door and go and sit down at his computer. He'll have a really long, boring day at work and go home. That's the expectation. But obviously in comedy, it's funny because the expectation is broken. It's violated. I worked really hard on this slide. Did you see his arm twisting? Comedy only works when the expectation is broken, because we're surprised. So, I was really inspired by this and thought, yeah, that makes so much sense. How does it relate to me? How does it relate to my world? Obviously, it does through storytelling. Because storytelling is nothing but a whole mishmash of setting up expectations and then meeting them at certain points and then breaking them at other points. And I think with the concepts of music and comedy, you can say that in a story, the music provides this structure. So you have a certain expectation of a story to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we call this kind of basically acts. And usually it's a setup, a confrontation, and a resolution. So the music provides a kind of safe structure. If you're talking about Star Wars, Luke, he learns about the Empire, he fights the Empire, and then he defeats the Empire. That is the structure of that story. But if the story was completely linear, it would be really boring, it's super predictable, and we wouldn't have any fun, or we wouldn't be scared, or we wouldn't have any real emotion. So comedy comes in and adds little quirks to our storyline. And comedy isn't just funny. I mean, Star Wars isn't necessarily a comedy. Comedy is also shock and surprise and, plot twists. For example, when Luke learns that Vader is his father, we all get very shocked. Oh, no! And also later on, we learn Leia's his sister. Ugh. So my takeaway from talking to Jeff is this. Music sets expectations and meets them. Comedy sets expectations, then breaks them. And good storytelling relies on both. And I'm talking about storytelling now because I think as web designers or any designers, we are storytellers. Every day we tell stories. Sometimes it's very direct or very literal. So we have a new product that we want to describe or sell for a client. We're telling the story about this product. Or we have an editorial piece or a blog post. We're literally telling a story. Other times, we're creating user journeys. So we're putting up the signposting and the structure so the user can walk through it and essentially tell their own story. So whether it's Facebook or Ryanair or your local brewery or whatever it is, every website in some way, indirect or direct, it will tell a story. And the difference between good and bad design is how well that story is told. So good designers tell good stories. It's how we get the point across, how we get our audience invested in the story that we're telling or the journey that we create. So then, music and comedy, strictly speaking in terms of web design, what does it look like? Well, music is all this stuff. It's the UX, the usability, performance, patterns, library, style guides. It's a lot of stuff, and it's all the stuff that makes the web more predictable and more consistent, and makes for a user journey that has less friction. For example, it's music that makes us make buttons look like buttons, so people know intuitively how to, to click them. It's also music that makes us go, maybe we should call this button save instead of let's go, because people don't really know what let's go means. It's also music that made all these major apps like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube move their kind of primary navigation from the hamburger down to this kind of thumb accessible menu. So music is really powerful and really, really useful in web design. Comedy is kind of the other stuff. Personality, difference, friction, confidence, etc. It's the stuff that is unexpected. It's the emotion and the friction. It's the exploration of websites. And the delight in a website, in comedy, is basically seeing something that you didn't expect. This, ironically titled blog post, is on Medium. And Medium is a very, very musical interface, because it behaves exactly the way we expect it to. It's probably the epitome of blog design. It's really easy. You scroll the page, there's no friction, there's no unwanted attention or distractions, maybe apart from, I think we've got Hipster Dave coming up. My point is that Medium works really well because it's so musical. It's not there to expand our minds or to break our conceptions of what design is or what a reading experience is. This is a magazine built by a company in Edinburgh. It's for the Business Gateway. And it's also a reading experience. It's also text. It's also telling a story. But they're telling a story in a very different way. It's much more visual. The layouts are varied. There are interesting interactions. It's basically many blog posts put together to create some sort of online magazine. And I'm not advocating one way over the other, but I think you can see the difference in expression. This site has more to it in terms of exploration, in terms of surprise, in terms of emotion. It has more personality. Comedy sometimes is just friction. And my favorite example of that is this site, which doesn't show up very well. Basically, this says, hello, my name is Alan, I write fiction. So this is the portfolio site for a fiction writer. And there's no email address, there's no Twitter handle, there's no hero image with a typewriter on it, there's no navigation. But there are 3 words with underlines, and when you click on those words, the site begins to grow. And Alan starts to tell his story. And this reminded me so much of these text-based adventure books when I was a kid. So I just kept clicking these links. I wanted to find out more, and suddenly I discovered his email address and his Twitter handle, and I started reading the first chapter of his book. Now, I'm not saying when you're next to your website, just hide all the contact details and force people to click through. What I am saying is that Alan, because he's an individual who has a strong personality, he decided to tell his story the way he wanted to tell his story. And because he's forcing me to engage with it in this very literal way, I remember this so much better than if it was just there. Maybe if all this text was just on a page, I would have been super bored straight away and just left. Comedy is random. Very quick example is this portfolio for a designer from Dundee. Every time I interact with his logo, the layout changes. Every time I refresh the page, the colors change. And this layout isn't completely random in the sense that it has a structure, but it's got this really simple algorithm just mixes it up every time you interact with it, which makes sense because he's an interaction designer. It doesn't mean that it's not usable. It's perfectly readable. It works on mobile, etc. But it's a cool little thing, and it just adds a little bit of randomness. And again, his site has more personality as a result. Comedy is sometimes just being different. Now, it's not always a good idea to be different just for the sake of being different. But this is a design conference website. There are no pictures. There are no pictures of speakers. Every single word has a crazy hover state of some sort. It's got tickers, like 3 or 4 tickers running across the site. And this is an international design conference. And it's sold out. So obviously the design didn't make it any worse. My point again is that I remember this website and it really stands out in this ocean of hero images and ocean of like visually beautiful but at the same time boring sites. Obviously comedy is also humor. And for an individual like Alan or someone who's just a designer with a small campaign or a microsite or a portfolio, you have more of an opportunity perhaps to be funny than if you're a big corporation. But Zendesk, they had this homepage, I think last year, about this time. And their whole thing is about bringing companies and customers closer together. Now, this is basically classic one in terms of the layout. But instead of the hero image, they have this cute little video, which literally brings you really, really close to this lady. And you know, it's not offensive, it's not a bad joke, it's just a little bit of silliness. And she looks happy about it, and I get a connection to this website because it's human and personal and just a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So, when is it appropriate then to be comedic or to use comedy on a website? Not every site should be funny or surprising, and not every budget allows for these kind of quirks. So it kind of depends what your message is and what you're doing. But I have this idea that maybe comedy is there for when you want to tell a story, not necessarily when you get people to sign up to something. So in this example, this is from our own work at Primate. We worked with this company called PWS. They do work surfaces for kitchens. So we wanted to avoid having a picture of a worktop in a kitchen and instead focus on these materials, in this case, granite. So we're telling this really long story about how the granite is shaped, how it's dug out of the ground, how it's cut into slabs. Those slabs are then polished. And then the polished slabs, they go into this truck and it gets shipped across Europe, ends up in this factory up in England. It gets polished, it gets finished, it gets inspected. And at the end of this very, very long journey, some might say it takes millions of years to get this product, it ends up in a kitchen. And obviously we have a call to action so people can click through and see the range. And once they do, we change the approach. So we're no longer in comedy land, we're no longer trying to tell this elaborate story. Now we're just browsing different types of worktops, and we want this interface to be as musical as possible. So I think that in a sense, comedy helps sell the product. It helps tell this emotional story, whereas music helps the user make the purchase. It removes all friction from the purchasing process. This is another campaign we did recently. You're not in Scotland, so it wouldn't really make a difference. But if you want to check this out, it's createasmile.org. And the idea, the brief from the client here was to get more people to sign up to their mailing list. So how can we do this? Well, obviously, if you think musically, you just have a blank page and there's a form in the middle and it says, please sign up to our mailing list, and you just sign up, because thousands of people would just do that, right? No. You need more. You need the story, you need an emotional connection, you need comedy. So the campaign was basically based on this idea of creating smiles. So we were very happy with our technical team. We used SVGs to basically randomly generate up to something like 35,000 little faces. It's super lightweight, so we can use CSS animations and stuff just to make it a little bit more engaging. And the idea is that this act of just pressing that button and see a new face pop up every time, and then for people to choose an avatar, add it to this wall. It's a visual representation of their support. We have, I think now we're at 2,500 or something. There's a lot of faces there, and so there's a reason for people to get behind the cause. It's a visual indicator they can post on Facebook that they've done something, and thus we get people to sign up. So there's a real balance between music, just making it easy and smooth, and also comedy, trying to create this emotional connection. So to me, it's obvious that comedy is important. But when I look online, when I read blogs, when I read Twitter, it's just all about music. It's all about performance and usability and UX. Like, why don't we talk more about comedy, about the funny stuff? I think it's because our environment is really scientific. So obviously we test our sites, we collect all the data, we measure it, and then we incrementally improve. We tweak the color of a button, or we change a short piece of text to see what converts better. And that's really safe, and it makes us feel good because we can prove to our boss or to our stakeholders or to our clients or to our bottom line that this little change made a real difference. But it also makes it really scary to step outside of that framework and try and do something that can't be tested or something that takes a long time to implement. So we invent all these rules for ourselves. We focus on establishing rules of storytelling instead of just telling really good stories. And rules are useful, but rules are also dogmatic. And the longer we have them, the more they kind of become part of our gospel. So we get these commandments like, thou shalt not defineth thy line height in pixels. Thou shalt not make thy pages scroll infinitely. Or fairly recently, this has become a really big deal. Thou shalt not taketh the name of the Lord performance in vain. And like I said, the rules are useful, but they're also frustrating. Because we're designing a site, our client's giving us 3 pieces of content, they're really important, all 3, so we put them side by side, and that's obviously a very bad idea because we should start with mobile. So we start with mobile and we put the navigation into a little hamburger icon because we can't fit it all side by side. Obviously that's a bad idea too. Not a problem? We'll stack the navigation. Still there, really easy. What happens then is that the content doesn't fit, so we just have to stack the content too so people can scroll. It's easy, people know how to do that. But there's a rule for that too. Ultimately, the solution is to have a carousel, because you can just swipe. You don't have to scroll. People know how to swipe on mobile phones. Sometimes I really love my job, you know? I think having all these rules kind of take out the fun of design. It makes us really predictable, and it makes the web, on the whole, more boring. I'm not the only one who thinks like that. Andy Clark seems to be really angry about it. I also care about it, and I think you guys should care too. Not because of some sort of idealistical reason that, oh, design should be great and fun and just wonderful all the time. The simple reason is boring stuff makes less money. Now, I only know this because other people have kind of figured this out before me. And I mean people in the advertising industry. Okay, so we're trying to sell chocolate. We walk into the boss's office and we say, I've got a really good idea. It's an advert that's over a minute long, and for 95% of it, it's just a gorilla playing the drums. Have you guys seen the advert before? A few of you. I think it was aired first in 2007 in the UK. It did really, really well. The press was writing about it. It was so strange. It got shared. It got pushed out there. But crucially, it made money. So there's a takeaway from this, which is just add a gorilla. This is the kind of stuff that we love as web designers. Like, there's a piece of takeaway that we can tweet, that we can take it home and say, this is what we need to do.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection, a pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics, and a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
Okay, a new client comes in, it's Volvo, they want to sell trucks. Do you have any ideas? Yes! Jean-Claude Van Damme. This advert was part of a big campaign that also did really well for Volvo. And what unites the two campaigns is that they're different. They make people talk, they make people laugh, and they're what you don't expect from those brands. So what I'm trying to say is that creative stuff makes more money. And in Cannes, there's a festival called the Cannes Lions. Every year they have thousands of people come in and celebrate creativity. And ad companies from around the world, they gather, they put their projects forward, and then the ones that win awards are the ones that have a good return on investment, who's also really creative. And what they see is that even big companies like McDonald's, the stuff that win creative awards also make more money. Heineken say the same thing. The stuff that we produce that's really creative and out there, it makes us more money. So if you want takeaways from this talk, this is one of two. There's more to it, as in there's more to web design than consistency, usability, and performance. And beauty, surprise, and delight are functions of their own. There is value in surprising people and make people think, discover something beautiful. It's not all just about performance and UX. So, the good shit loves music, and the good shit loves comedy. And for me, the great thing about today would be, after the conference is over, we'll all walk outside, we can maybe hold hands, we can look at the sunset, and then we can commit to making musical comedy together. Thank you.
All the way from Norway and Scotland. Thank him for the talk, and thank him for bringing the Norwegian and Scottish weather with him for you guys in Bucharest. Espen Brunborg.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Chris.